Hello and welcome back. My continuation of my book reading of Stephen King's Misery. I'm at chapter 16 now. Good news, bad news. Here we go. In his dream, he was stung by a bee. So at first, he thought he was dreaming. Paul, in his dream, the bee was dangerous and he wanted desperately to escape. Paul! That was no dream voice, it was Annie's voice. He forced his eyes open. She was standing there in the shadows as if she had never been away, wearing her ugly clothes. He saw the syringe in her hand and understood that it hadn't been a bee. She had given him an injection. But what had she? Fear came again. But his mind was too dull to feel it strongly. Whatever drug she had given him was making things unreal for him. He tried to lift his hands, and it felt as if there were invisible weights hanging from them. It's the end, he thought. The end of the story of Paul Sheldon. Curiously, the thought almost made him happy. The end of 1001 Nights. Strange, half-formed ideas kept coming into his brain as a powerful drug crept into all the corners of his mind. There you are, Annie said. I see you, Paul. Those blue eyes. Did I ever tell you that I think your eyes are lovely? But I suppose plenty of women have told you that. And bolder women than me. He was sitting on the end of his bed. He bent down to check something on the floor, and for a moment all he could see was a broad, strong back. He heard the sound of something metal and something wooden, and the unmistakable sound of a box of matches. He turned back towards him and smiled. Whatever else might have happened, he was no longer depressed. That must be good, mustn't it? What do you want first, Paul? She asked. The good news or the bad news? Good news first. He managed a big, foolish grin. I suppose the bad news is that you don't really like the book. I tried. I thought it was going well. She looked at him sadly. I love the book, Paul. What do you think? I asked you to fill in all the ends yourself. Because I don't want to read any more until the end. I don't want to spoil it. Paul's rugged grin widened. If she loved the book, she wasn't going to kill him. At least, not yet. Andy smiled back at him. The good news, she said, is that your car has gone. I've been very worried about your car, Paul. I knew only a big storm would wash it away. When the snow melted in the spring, the water from the mountains was enough to wash away the body of that dirty bird, Pomeroy. But a car is much heavier than a man, isn't it? But the storm and the melting snow at the same time did it. Your car has gone. That's the good news. Alarm bells rang in Paul's mind. Who was Pomeroy? Then he remembered the young man in Annie's album. Don't pretend, Paul, she said. I know you know about Pomeroy. I know you read my album. I suppose I want you to read it. Otherwise, why would I have left it out? But I wanted to be sure, and when I came back, the hair was broken. Hair? He said faintly. Yes, I read about it somewhere. If you think someone has been looking through your belongings, you stick some hair over the drawers or the book or whatever. Then, if the hair is broken or moved, you know that someone has been here. Again, she bent over the end of the bed. Again, There were the sounds of something metal and something wooden. So I crept in this morning, he said, as quiet as a mouse. And yes, all 3 hairs were broken. So I knew you'd been looking at my album. He paused and smiled again. I wasn't surprised. I knew he had been out of the room. That's the bad news, Paul. I've known for a long time. He should feel angry or disappointed or something, he supposed. But the drug made it impossible. Anyway, we were talking about your car, she said. Early yesterday afternoon, I felt a lot better. I spent most of the time up there on my knees praying to God. And you know, Paul, when you pray sincerely to God, He always answers your prayers. I knew what I had to do. I put the special tires on the car for driving on ice and drove slowly down from the hills. It was very dangerous, Paul, but I felt safe in the arms of God. That's very nice, Annie, Paul tried to say, but the sounds were indistinct. That's very nice, Annie. I stopped on the way down to look for your car. I knew what I would have to do if I saw it. If it was there visible, there would be questions, and I'd be the first one they question because they know about my past. Actually, one of the reasons I rescued you and brought you home was that you crashed there. What do you mean? I parked there in exactly the same place when I got rid of that Pomeroy. She slapped her hand in contempt. He said he was an artist, but he was just another dirty bird. He was hitchhiking, and I picked him up. He said he was going to Sidewinder to do a job there. I let him stay here. We were lovers. She looked at Paul, challenging him to deny it. He didn't see anything, but he didn't believe her at all. When I found out that he didn't have a job in Sidewinder, I looked at some of his drawings, and they were terrible. I could have drawn better pictures. He came in while I was looking at them, and we had an argument. He laughed at me, so You killed him, Paul said. He seemed uncomfortable. I guess it was something like that. I don't remember very well. I only remember him being dead. I remember giving him a bath. He looked at her, felt sick, soupy horror. He could see in his mind Pomeroy's body in the bath, with no clothes on, eyes open and staring up the ceiling. I had to, she said. You probably don't know what the police can do with just one hair or a piece of dirt from someone's finger. You don't know, but I do. Because I worked in hospitals for 10 years. I know. She was making herself angry with that special, mad Annie anger, which she knew so well by now. They're all out to get me, all of them. Do you know? They would have listened if I tried to tell them about him. They probably say that I tried to kiss him and he laughed at me, and then I killed him. And you know what, Annie? I think that just might be closer to the truth. The dirty birds around here would say anything to make trouble for me. She paused, breathing hard, and again seemed to challenge him to deny what she was saying. I washed him, what was left of him, and drove up into the hills. I parked and carried him about a mile into the woods. I didn't hide him or anything. No, I knew the snow would cover him, and I thought the spring floods would take his body and clothes away. It worked even better than I imagined. They didn't find his body for a whole year, and 27 miles away. But your car won't go so far, Paul. It's too heavy. It'll just be stuck somewhere in the thick forest. Maybe someone will find its rusty body in 2 years' time or in 5 years' time, when wild animals have made their homes on the back seat and plants are growing through the windows, and by then the book will be finished and you'll be back in New York or somewhere, and I'll be living my quiet life here. Maybe we'll write to each other sometimes. She smiled at her imagination. Anyway, I was thinking, you see, your car had gone, so I knew you could stay and finish the book, and that made me happy because I love you so much. Thank you, Annie, he said. But would you want to stay? She went on. That was the question I had to ask myself, and I knew the answer. I knew the answer even before I saw that you were getting stronger. I noticed those marks on the floor over there. I realized you had been out of the room. Then I started to look carefully, and I saw that one of the figurines of my table was in a different position. That bird always flies south, Paul. The first time you went out was after we had that silly fight about the paper, wasn't it, Paul? Yes. What was the point in denying it? You want your pills, of course. I should have guessed, but when I'm angry, I get... You know. I certainly do know, Annie. Then 2 days later, one afternoon, when you were asleep, I tried to come into your room to give you medicine. And the door handle wouldn't turn at first. There was a noise inside it, as if something was loose. So I gave you some stronger medicine to make sure you wouldn't wake up. And I took the whole lock and handle off the door. And look what I found. She put her hand in her pocket, pulled out a broken bit of a hairpin, and showed it to Paul. Then, of course, I realized what was happening and found the marks on the doorframe too. Paul couldn't help himself. He began to laugh. He had been so stupid. And that was the end of chapter 16, Good News, Bad News. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.